Welcome back to the Politics and Society podcast. Today we're just giving a brief update on the presidential election as things currently stand. So, according to the most recent Business Post Red Sea exit poll, Catherine Connolly was on 36%, Heather Humphreys on 25%, and Jim Gavin was on 12%. So, Marv, what are some of the initial takeaways from these figures?
Yeah, it looks like Catherine Connolly has a very comfortable lead. Yeah, it seems to be operating in both polls have been released roughly 9 to 10 percentage points above Heather Humphreys. Both of them increased by about 2 to 4% over the previous poll. Humphreys, I should say, is not making any sizable ground on Connolly from what we can see. And then Jim Gavin holding 12%. If he does get 12.5% of his vote, he'll be able to get his expenses back. So that'll be interesting to see, will he actually hold that figure on the day? But it's looking very much like Catherine Connolly will finish probably a good bit ahead of Humphreys, and Jim Gavin's transfers of anyone who decides to vote for his preference for him will decide the day. The biggest thing for me is the undecideds. There's a massive amount. I think it was 27% in the recent polls said they were undecided of who to vote for. It was around that. So that's quite a massive figure there. So we'll see how many of them actually do intend on voting, and are there to be won by either candidate or who's just not going to bother. But that'd be interesting.
Do you think that there could be a silent majority that could come out and vote for Heather Humphreys, as we see traditionally with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael? Like, how many times did we look at constituencies and see what we see on the ground does not translate to these polls? You know, Fianna Fáil have notoriously in recent years done terribly in these polls, yet they always exceed expectation. You know, they are the biggest party in terms of local government councillors. They're also the biggest party in terms of TDs. So you'd imagine that some of those transfers would go to Heather Humphreys, or some of them votes would sway over, like what Micheál Martin and a lot of the Fianna Fáil TDs have come out.
I mean, that's me. Like, I don't think this is a dead race. Like, I think this is, like, we won't really know until, say, exit polls, for that very reason, because yet there is always that traditional kind of shy Fianna Fáil voter, they used to call it, who would never show up on opinion polls, but would kind of always come out to vote. You know, we seen it with the general election last year, where, you know, the Sinn Féin vote seemed to be higher in the opinion polls than what actually was, where, say, Fianna Fáil in particular was a lot higher in the exit poll than it was in the opinion poll. So yeah, no, I'm certainly not ruling out a kind of a surge for Humphreys above what we're seeing at the moment in opinion polls. It's just a question of, I don't know, it's just a question of, will that be enough to bridge the gap to Catherine Connolly at the moment? Because if the opinion polls are to be believed, it looks like Connolly's going to have a very comfortable lead over Humphreys on first preferences. So it'd be a question to see how actually closer that's actually going to be. And then, will Gavin's transfers actually make much of a difference in the end?
Can I ask you a question in relation to the actual day of the voting? So we're about 8 days out from the election now, but it's taking place on a Friday on a bank holiday weekend. Typically, the age demographic of Connolly voters would probably be younger. You know, statistically speaking, younger voters don't tend to go out and vote as much as, you know, your older traditional voters. Could that be a factor, and could that play into these kind of polls? And, like, could we see a tighter race, even as tight to rely on some Jim Gavin transfers?
That's a good point. With it being a Friday, like you said, and it being on a bank holiday weekend, yeah, you would wonder how many people actually might be out of the country even, or just going on trips. But yeah, it's kind of a traditional voting day here in Ireland, really, is the Friday. I certainly have mostly voted on Fridays in my time. I remember voting on a Saturday in 2020, the general election that year, but that was abnormal, and that was the first Saturday election, I think, since 1980. So it's very much kind of the way we do it. You know, I'd like to think, personally, I think most elections should probably be on a Saturday to try to get as many people out to vote. But then there's all sorts of logistical questions as well, because people have to work on the elections as well. So are people having to take time off to work the polling stations? But then also there's the count centres as well the following day. You'd hope this would be a 2 count kind of affair. Like, it wouldn't be like what we've seen with the general election or European elections.
The European,
Yeah,
crazy.
oh no, won't be that long. But yeah, no, that could have an effect as well. You never know. But the thing is, I think arguably there's not as much buzz about it as, say, a general election, or say a really kind of spicy referendum. The kind of way that there's not as much of a like. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Like, I don't think there'll be a mass mobilization to the polls. So I feel like this is going to be a
Yeah,
very low key.
I think, and that's going to be a problem. And I do predict that Catherine Connolly will probably win the election, but I do think that, this is how she could lose the election, because I don't think it's captivating the audience, And I'm going to ask you a question now in a minute, just in relation to what's going to be happening over the next week. Unless Catherine Connolly can really get her audience to go out and vote for her, and we actually learn from each presidential candidate what they want to give to Ireland, or what is their vision for their presidency, because all it seems to be is just kind of these hardball questions. Catherine Connolly getting questioned about her employment of a woman who was in jail for reasons we talked about already, and then Heather Humphreys, she's been asked many questions about her time in cabinet, and her record in cabinet over the past number of years. So we haven't really got a chance to actually find out a lot about what the president will stand for, what they'll kind of show us. I only saw the other day Catherine Connolly was kind of asked, where's the first places you want to visit when you're president, and looking back 14 years ago, I remember there used to be quick fire questions with Michael D. Higgins, David Norris, Sean Gallagher. They had all these questions already asked weeks before this, so it feels like we just don't really have as much of a presidential election. I know 2 candidates, but what are we going to look forward to over the next week, basically? Like, is anything going to change here, or is it going to stay much the same until the election?
Yeah, I can't see anything major happening. Probably famous last words, you never know. But to be honest, I can't see anything much materialising over the next week of anything new to shake it up. I think it's I can't see it anyway. So I think we're going to be talking much the same stuff for the next week, and then we'll get to polling day, and it's just a question of who turns out, and we'll see. But yeah, I would probably favour Connolly right now. I think it's hers to lose, really. So it's just who can mobilise their voters, really.
Yeah, a lot can happen in a week in politics, as we saw with Jim Gavin, and as we saw with your last 2 predictions at the end of the 2 podcasts I asked, and Humphreys was the clear favourite before Jim exited the race, but also a month before, and then 3 months before, it was Mairead McGuinness, so, and Connolly even went as far as 6-1 in some bookmakers and that, so, there still is 8 days till polling day. There still is the Heather Humphreys interview that will come out on Monday, and the debate that will follow. You have one more point to say, do you?
Because if you go back and check my Galway West prediction we did on this platform last November, I tipped Catherine Connolly for the Irish. Just saying.
There you go. And look, I have to give a shout out to a man from Navan, Aaron Ayres Minty. He also said, like, I'm talking a year and a half ago, he texted me saying that Catherine Connolly is presidential material, and he was asking, was there any chance that she'd go for it? So I have to give credit to him as well. But look, they are some of the issues that are going to happen over the next week anyways. And look, if there's any more updates in the presidential election, I'm sure we'll have a podcast out just before the final debates, and even after the debates coming up, and we'll kind of close off on the whole campaign itself. But until then, it's been a pleasure as always, and we'll see you next time.